Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. Welcome to a brand new program called Back to Basics. I'm your host, Abdul Saeed, and we have with us in the studio today our guest, Dr. Mamdouh Mohammed. Dr. Mamdouh, welcome.
Welcome.
Dr. Mamdouh Mohammed is a former professor at Johns Hopkins University. He is also the director of Arrow for Consulting and Training. He has worked in over 7 universities across the globe and has traveled extensively and given speeches and lectures in the field of education and dawah. He has traveled as far east as Indonesia and as far west as the United States. He is currently married with 5 children and 11 grandchildren. We ask Allah to protect and preserve them.
Ameen.
Dr. Mamdouh, welcome to the show. Today we would like to discuss the topic of critical thinking. Do we tend to encourage critical thinking? Do we lean towards it? What is the Islamic perspective on this?
Okay. Let me first tell people what are critical thinking questions versus closed questions. Questions are of 2 types. Questions that begin with what, when, who. They are closed. The answer is closed. If I ask you a question like, when were you born? Do you mind if you answer the question?
When was I born?
Yeah.
I was born in January 1986.
Yeah, so it's a very
it's a direct question, direct answer.
Very direct question. It doesn't show any intelligence. It doesn't require a lot of thinking from you when I ask you. But when I ask you, how did you do that? For example, how did you learn driving a car at the age of 7? You start thinking and rethinking, right? So questions that begin with how, what is your opinion about a specific topic? And similar questions would open the door for you to think deeply. When I ask you to compare, what's better for you, the Macintosh, the Apple, or the IBM? And you start thinking because you're going to consider a lot of things.
I'm going to think that IBM is really a household brand anymore.
Okay. Yes, it stopped. And the other brands, I mean. So you need to think because you are considering many things.
Yes.
So the answer does not come very straightforward. It's not one answer. You can get 2 answers. You can get 3 answers.
Yeah.
So this is something very important.
Well, this requires a thought process, but is it necessarily critical?
Yeah.
Okay.
But this thought process is something we will move a higher level of it. Which one you prefer and why? So this requires something critical because they're saying that I think there is some faults in this machine.
Yes. This
is based on what critical. Now we are going to criticize this machine.
Yes.
To say something that is not sometimes mentioned in books. After long experience with it, I found that it always stops whenever I do this.
Yes.
So this is something very deep and very important. Whenever we train our children to do some questions that are closed, they would not have an opportunity to develop their thinking. There's something that's missing. And this is, I think, the best ones to benefit from this are teachers and parents. Parents at home and teachers at school, they don't use why, they don't use how, and rather they use very closed questions. And Islam really is something that very deeply rooted in Islam is the issue of critical thinking.
Pondering, reflecting, things like this.
Reflecting upon this. And you can find the word reflect upon this in the Quran. أَفَلَا يَتَفَكَّرُونَ أَفَلَا يُبْصِرُونَ So Islam has a lot of ayat that encourages people and motivates people to think and reflect and to do the critical thinking that we are talking about.
Yeah, even...
Yes, go ahead.
Even towards the aspect where the polytheists who used to worship idols and statues, the question is brought to them, this that can't benefit its own self.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you think that it can benefit or harm you?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely. You see by yourself that it cannot defend itself.
Yes.
How would you worship? How can it defend you? You believe that it is that has the power to defend you. Had it had the power to defend itself,
Yes.
we may assume that it had the power to defend you, but this is not the case. So it's a very good critical thinking here.
Yeah.
And you would find that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the best teacher in this universe, when he used to ask the companions these beautiful questions, can't you recite the whole Quran every day?
Mm-hmm.
The companions were shocked because reciting the whole Quran may require 8 hours or more.
Yes.
And it sounded to them very strange. So they spelled it out to the Prophet ﷺ. They thought of it and they came to the conclusion that it's almost impossible. And the Prophet ﷺ was motivating them to think of something different.
Yes.
He was motivating them to reach the answer. Don't you know? And he said, don't you know that the recitation of Surah Al-Ikhlas equals the recitation of one, or the reward of reciting 1/3 of the whole Quran? So now they got it. They understood it. When he motivated them by another question, still the question that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said was not an answer for the question he raised first. So now this is another approach. And this is something very important for teachers and parents as well. Mm-hmm. So you ask a question, and then you follow it up with another question, and you follow it up with another question. And each question leads to a level of thinking. So now you are taking the students from this level to a higher level to a higher level. That's what we are missing in our schools. Yeah. That's what is missing in our homes. And we said that some examples now, you mentioned an example from the Quran, I mentioned example from the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and there are hundreds, if not thousands of this.
And they're all beautiful and unique in their own way. Yes.
So it is very important that we should have this. Parents, don't give the right. You can ask the students, your children all the time. And that's why now this is a golden opportunity for parents who don't consider the use of these tools, the iPad and the iPhone and all these machines that have games for children that attract children. Why? Because it motivates you to think. Mm-hmm. To solve the problem, you have to move this. It doesn't work, so you have to look for another solution. So you think of another, and so on and so on.
Sometimes there's even more than one solution for them to find.
Absolutely. Yeah. And even if you answer it, it gives you another opportunity to give another solution, another solution. And every time you redo the game, it requires another solution. So really, it gives those children who use these games, and that's why they're called educational games.
Yes.
And other games may not be labeled as educational games, yet they invite you and they motivate you. And that's
problem solving.
Problem solving. Yeah. And that's why they attract the students more than the best teachers in the world. All students who are smart students, they are attracted to their teachers to a specific limit. Then after that, they know that these are the limits of the teacher, so they look for something else, has more horizon than that. So when you interact with the game, and interaction with anything, you learn more than you learn from passive learning, because you're listening to the teacher explaining something, you understand it, that's fine. Yet you are still passive learner.
When you say passive learning, you mean just sitting there while you're spoon-fed your information.
You're spoon-fed. Yes.
You're almost lectured, just lectured, yeah.
You don't interact with it. You don't experiment with it. And all the people who experiment with things and interact with things, the quality of learning goes deeper and deeper. That's what I mentioned in other episodes when I said the quality of learning.
Yes.
A person who experiment with things, particularly in lessons like physics and science and other things, that when you experiment with them, you learn. You cannot learn a language when you are passive. You will be a very good listener because the teacher is the one who speaks and speaks and speaks, and you are the one who listens and listens. So you learn one skill only, which is listening. Where are the other 3 skills? They are lost somewhere because you don't experiment with them. You don't practice them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so then how does that relate in terms that we talked about this Islamic aspect and how this is based heavily in the Quran and in the Sunnah? Obviously, critical thinking where you're critical or you criticize something within the context of Islam is limited to what we accept as revelation. So we don't criticize the revelation itself. We are never critical of the belief of
I would
the
say
Muslims.
that the word critical thinking here refers to
Reflective thinking.
reflective thinking and problem solving.
Okay.
When the famous hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that he told people that you need to pray in a specific area, to pray Salat al-Asr in a specific area. Some people understood that they have really to pray Asr in that place, and some of the Muslims, understood that the purpose here is the Prophet ﷺ is motivating them to hurry up.
Yeah.
So here, this is a good level of critical thinking. They analyzed the statement of the Prophet ﷺ, and they found that it is almost impossible to do this. So they understood that the purpose is this. This is a kind of critical thinking. They did not criticize it, but they analyzed it critically.
And this is found in the science of maqasid al-sharia, like the intentions of the sharia.
Oh, yes.
So you're not just studying things at a literal sense.
The whole subject of fiqh means understanding, means problem solving, means critical thinking, means applying what you understand to the reality to see where is the gap so that you can modify.
Not just memorize blindly.
Not just memorize. Memorize is one aspect, definitely. And this leads me to the way that people look at knowledge and look at education now. And I think we can continue this after the break, inshallah, because it needs some sort of elaboration.
Okay. And with that, we'd like to go to the break, inshallah. So we'll see you in a bit. Back to the show, Back to Basics. We have with us in the studio our guest, Dr. Muhammad. Dr. Mamdouh, welcome. Just before the break, you mentioned that we wanted to get into the topic of education and what is the nature of education. Can you elaborate, please?
Yeah, I remember that. I think if in the past we used to look at education, that it is something that we should memorize. So the main focus was on memorization. So how the educators looked at the human brain as if this is a skull.
Okay.
It's as if it's here to memorize knowledge. Everything that you learn, you should memorize it. They forgot that we need to understand things. So memorization, which was the main focus in the past, it became part.
When you say past, are you talking about the deep past in the beginning of Islam? Or are you talking about the past 120 years?
It depends on where you live.
I'd say in regards to the Muslim world, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I'd say when the modern education or secular system started to come to the Muslim world, we focused on memorization within that system. And ironically enough, when the old system happened, where people used to learn in the masajid and with the local scholars and the more traditional system, people were critical. People did use their minds to understand.
Yeah, I will come to the issue of critical, but now you should understand that there is something that you need to memorize.
Okay.
How much is it? It differs from one subject into another. And there is something that needs to be understood, and I will give some example. And there is something that needs to be acquired, like skills. So now, when we look at education, we look at three things: skills, knowledge, and concepts, which is anything that needs to be understood.
Yes.
So three things here, three key words now I'm referring to, which are considered three main concepts. The knowledge, when you deal with knowledge, you need to memorize it. When I asked you, when were you born, you answered me, right? It's very straightforward. Yes, okay. There are many knowledge, particularly for us, the Muslims, the Quran and the Sunnah. But at the same time, there are many things that need to be understood, like the issue of fiqh. Like the issue of tafsir, when we deal with the Quran, when we need to understand. We need to understand the concept of as-samad.
Yes.
What is the meaning of as-samad? It's a whole concept, and by the way, it's so important in the life of every human being. If you understand the word as-samad, it will almost be impossible that you would apostate from the religion.
SubhanAllah.
Let me just give you a quick example.
Please do.
The word as-samad, if I explain it, it's two parts in one to understand. I'll explain this. The whole creation, every creature in this universe depends on Allah,
Yes.
requires Allah, needs Allah, all of them. And at the same time, this is the second part, Allah needs no one of them.
Yes.
The sun needs Allah in order to exist. Without Allah, the sun cannot exist.
Yes.
The oxygen that we breathe needs Allah to exist.
Yes.
Allah does not need
No.
oxygen to exist.
No.
So Allah, this combination of the two means as-samad. And I'm quite sure that if you ask anybody in this universe, do you know anyone or anything that has this quality?
Was self-sufficient.
Self-sufficient is part by itself. Yeah.
Well, being the one to provide for
Yeah.
everyone and
Yeah.
who everyone depends on.
It explains part of it.
Yes.
Yeah. Because self-sufficient is here, applies to Allah.
Yeah.
Yet still it did not explain this.
Yes.
The need of this part to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yeah.
So here, what I'm trying to say, this is a concept. Now if you ask someone, have you ever known anyone or anything has this quality?
Of course
No.
not.
It applies only to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yeah.
Just by this word, a lot of people became Muslims
SubhanAllah.
because of this, the word as-samad. Ask this, is Muhammad as-samad?
No.
Is Jesus as-samad? No. Is this? So this is the importance of understanding. Teaching the Quran focuses on what? On this concept of understanding. Teaching of tajweed, mainly it focuses on what? On the skill. It's a skill of making, of course, understanding.
It's almost a combination of memory and skill, but yeah, it's more skill, especially once.
But memory is just very little memory. So anyway, any subject matter can be divided into these three areas.
Yeah.
The area of knowledge, which requires memorization. The area of concepts, which requires understanding.
Yeah.
The area of skills, which require practice.
Yeah.
So now, every teacher and even the designers of the curricula, if they don't have this in their mind, you will find the focus and the weakness of any material they produce, because it may focus only in one of these areas.
So you're saying that most things need these three practical.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Every subject needs, but with different focus. Sometimes the skill may be 90% of the subject matter.
Yeah.
Sometimes the knowledge, for example, when you talk about history, history is basically knowledge with very limited number of concepts.
I would agree.
Yeah.
There's obviously some concepts because
Absolutely.
there's comparison between different
Absolutely.
historical
There are few
accounts.
concepts, of course.
Yeah.
The concept of empire, the concept of imperialization, and so on and so
Well,
on.
even just the fact that if we're looking at history, there's two sides to every story, sometimes multiple sides to a story. So you have to be critical in your thinking. For example, if we find a story coming from a certain segment of society, we're going to find that they're biased towards a certain interpretation of historical events.
What I'm trying now to say that if you are dealing with education and you don't understand this,
Yeah.
even the parents should understand this. Because there's something that needs to be memorized, there's something else need to be understood, and something else need to be practiced.
Yeah.
So we should have this as a common thing among all the teachers and among all. If the teachers are not doing this and they don't understand this, this will be big damage for the students. Yeah.
Definitely.
Because they focus only on one aspect in their life. They don't develop the other two things, particularly the issue of concepts that require understanding.
Yeah, critical
Yes.
thinking.
From understanding, it takes
It takes that
critical
form.
thinking. Physics requires a lot of critical thinking, a lot of thinking. Yeah, Quran requires a lot of that. And
Even math.
beyond that, of course, math, and even beyond that, just not thinking, but reflective thinking, as the Quran requires us, because it gives you, for example, إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَعِبْرَةً, and this is very common in the Quran.
Yeah.
What is the ibra? Indeed, there is a lesson here. You have to think, what is the lesson behind this?
Yes.
You have to deduce the lesson. Now, a process of deduction. And this is, how do you call it? A thought, as you mentioned, a thought process here now. We need to think of this. So we need the education now. And that's why they tell the teacher now, there is a rule